Have you ever, like, felt like you're just perpetually stuck in the waiting room of life?
Oh, absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know that feeling, right? You're sitting there, proverbially flipping through some old magazine, just waiting for your name to be called.
Right. Just waiting.
Yeah, you're waiting for that career milestone that finally makes you feel secure, or, I don't know, for that relationship to solidify into something permanent.
Or just that elusive sense of stability.
Exactly. Where you can finally exhale, put your bags down, and just say to yourself, I have arrived. It's this deeply universal human desire.
It really is.
We all just want to arrive. We want to settle. We want to master our little corner of the world, put a fence around it, and, well, feel safe.
And honestly, it is an exhausting way to live.
It's so draining.
It is, because it produces this constant low-level hum of anxiety.
Mm.
It's the persistent fear that we haven't quite made it yet.
Yeah.
Like our foundation isn't poured deep enough to withstand whatever economic or personal storms might be on the horizon.
Which is terrifying.
It is. We spend so much of our waking energy trying to build a fortress of security. And the terrifying part is we always suspect the walls are too thin.
Right. And it's that exact tension, that desperate need for permanence versus the reality of our, fragile, shifting lives that we are unpacking today.
I love this topic.
Me too. We're taking a deep dive into a profoundly ancient yet shockingly relevant theme from our source materials today, which is pilgrimage and promise.
Yes.
We're going to look at the historical and narrative arc of Abraham, but let me be crystal clear right out of the gate here.
Please do.
We are not going to talk about Abraham as some dusty ancient curiosity or a flat character in a Sunday school flannel graph.
Right. No flannel grass here.
None.
Right.
We are examining his life as the ultimate psychological and theological blueprint for what it means to be a pilgrim.
And we should clarify that term.
Yeah, in this specific context, a pilgrim is not someone wearing a buckle hat on Thanksgiving. A pilgrim is someone who is called out, sent forward, and sustained entirely by a promise about the future, rather than by what they, currently possess in the present.
Which is just a complete paradigm shift. I mean, it takes that deeply human desire you just mentioned, the desire to settle, to conquer, to master, and it flips it completely upside down.
Totally upside down.
It suggests something really radical, like maybe the feeling of being in the waiting room isn't a glitch in the human system.
Wow.
Maybe it is the system. Maybe we were designed for the journey, not the immediate possession.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to truly grasp the blueprint of the pilgrim, we have to go all the way back to the foundational narrative of the Hebrew Bible.
Right to the beginning.
Exactly. We have to look at Genesis chapters 1 and 2, so creation and the fall. The underlying premise in the source material is that humanity was originally designed for a very specific vocation, which was trustful stewardship, not possession.
And the distinction between those two concepts, stewardship and possession, is really the hinge upon which this entire discussion turns.
It's massive.
It is. I mean, think about the setup of the Genesis account. You have this incredible, flourishing world, the Garden of Eden. But the crucial mechanic of that story is that the garden was a gift.
Right. They didn't buy it.
Exactly. It was a prototype of an inheritance. Adam and Eve were placed into a territory they didn't create. They didn't negotiate for it. They didn't conquer it with weapons.
They didn't build the fence.
Right. They didn't labor to build its foundational structures at all. Their entire existence was meant to be ordered around receiving from the divine presence, listening to the divine word, and executing a divine purpose.
So if I'm tracking with this, you're saying that even in literal paradise, they were already living a pilgrim life.
In a fundamental sense, yes. Because a pilgrim is someone who is entirely dependent on a higher reality and directed by a path they didn't forge.
Okay, that makes sense.
In Eden, Adam and Eve were recipients. They lived in a state of trustful stewardship. Their job was to cultivate and inhabit the earth, to draw out its potential, sure, but never to treat it as a self-enclosed property system that they owned and controlled independently of the Creator who gave it to them.
But then, of course, the narrative shifts, right? Genesis 3 happens, the fall.
The big turning point.
Yeah. And the way this is often framed in theological history is as a great spiritual inversion.
That's a great term for it.
Basically, humanity looks around at this incredible gift and decides that being a grateful recipient just isn't enough. We start grasping for absolute autonomy.
We want to own it.
Exactly. We want the security, we want the identity, and we want the power, but we want it completely independent of the giver.
It's the tragic moment where a gift is mutated into a possession.
Wow, yeah.
What should have been received with open hands becomes something to seize, to defend, and to control with clenched fists.
And what's the immediate, like, mechanical result of that grasping? It's exile.
Yes, exile.
They are driven out of the garden. But the sources emphasize we have to look deeper than just a geographical relocation.
Right, it's not just moving zip codes.
Exactly. Exile isn't just an event that happened to two people in antiquity. In this framework, exile becomes the permanent condition of the human heart.
It's structural.
From that moment forward, human beings are infected with this compulsion to seek permanence in places and structures that cannot finally hold them.
Right.
And I want to tie this grasping mentality to another major historical touchstone in the text, which is the story of Babel in Genesis 11.
Oh, perfect example.
Because Babel is essentially the fall scaled up to an industrial level, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
The text describes this moment where humanity is united, but they're united by pride and terror.
Mostly terror.
Yeah. They decide to build a massive tower, a ziggurat, specifically to, as the text says, make a name for themselves and to secure their own safety apart from God.
Because they're terrified of being scattered.
Exactly. So their solution is to build an empire of their own making.
It makes me think of someone renting a beautiful, fully furnished house. For a while, they enjoy it as a guest.
Sure.
But suddenly something snaps in their psychology. They can't handle the vulnerability of not being the owner.
They need control.
Yeah. So they start trying to forge the deed. They rip up the lease. They start putting up electric fences, changing all the locks, and claiming ultimate tyrannical ownership of a place they were only ever meant to inhabit as a steward.
That analogy captures the delusion perfectly. I mean, we are renters acting like we hold the ultimate cosmic deed.
Right.
And at Babel, you see the ultimate architectural manifestation of that delusion. It's collective, militarized human empire building.
It's arrogance.
It's humanity declaring in unison, we refuse to trust a promise or live in vulnerability. We will manufacture our own salvation and our own security out of baked bricks and mortar. We'll build our way up to the divine.
So, if our default setting as a species is now this Babel mentality, if we're hardwired to graft, to forge the deed, to build our own secure little fortresses and empires, how in the world does the narrative break that cycle?
That is the big question.
Like, how do you cure a species obsessed with building towers?
What's fascinating here is God's highly counterintuitive response to that obsession.
Counterintuitive how?
Well, human empire building reaches its absolute peak at Babel. And the narrative says God confuses their language and scatters them. But what happens in the very next chapter, Genesis 12, is the real cure.
Genesis 12.
Yes. To break the cycle of grasping and empire building, God does something entirely unexpected. He doesn't build a bigger tower to crush theirs.
Right. No divine skyscraper.
Right. He doesn't establish a massive rival empire. He focuses in on one single obscure man and calls him to do the exact opposite of what the people at Babel did.
He calls Abraham.
Yes, he calls Abraham to walk away from his secure structures.
Which catapults us right into the radical, disorienting disruption of Abraham's life. We have to talk about the geography and the culture here because the contrast is staggering.
It really is.
God comes to Abram, his name at the time, in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. And I think a lot of modern readers picture Ur as some dusty little backwater village with, like, a few tents and some goats.
Oh, it was anything but a backwater. Ur was a thriving, highly developed metropolis in ancient Mesopotamia, located in what is modern-day Iraq.
A metropolis?
Yeah, is a center of commerce, culture, and moon god worship. It had its own massive ziggurats. It had defensive walls.
So it was secure.
Very secure. It had a complex economy and a highly structured social hierarchy. To be a citizen of Ur, especially a prosperous one embedded in a large extended family, was to have the ancient equivalent of a blue-chip stock portfolio, a gated community, and a top-tier security system.
And God shows up and commands him to leave.
Just leave.
And not just a casual relocation, right? The command is brutal in its specificity. God says, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house.
He hits every level of security.
He's systematically stripping away every single layer of Abraham's identity, his safety net, and his economic security.
All of it.
And the ultimate kicker, God tells him to go to a land that he hasn't even shown him yet.
Right, I'll show you later. It's a command that is as theological as it is geographical.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the sheer psychological terror of what is being asked here.
It's terrifying.
Abraham is being summoned to step out into total, unmitigated vulnerability. He has to resign from his citizenship, leave his inheritance, and walk into the desert before he even has a map of his final destination.
Before he even has a map.
Yeah. And in exchange for giving up his tangible present security, God gives him a series of incredibly expansive but entirely intangible promises.
Just words at that point.
Just words. God promises to make him a great nation, to bless him, to make his name great, and crucially, that through him, all the families of the earth will be blessed.
Wow.
He is promised land, offspring, and global impact. But here's the catch. It is all delivered in the form of a promise, not a present possession.
And incredibly, Abraham goes. He actually packs up and walks away from the ziggurats of Ur.
He really does it.
But when he finally arrives in Canaan, the land he was promised, the narrative emphasizes a glaring reality, which the sources call his tent life.
Yes, the tent life.
He gets to the promised land, and he doesn't start laying foundations for a new Babel. He doesn't conquer a city and declare himself king.
No, he doesn't.
He moves through it. He builds altars at Shechem, at Bethel, at Hebron, but he never actually settles as a permanent, deed-holding landowner. He lives in a goat hair tent.
He inhabits the land, but he only possesses it in pledge form.
What does that mean in pledge form?
Well, he's surrounded by established Canaanite city-states, right?
Yeah.
Kings with armies and high walls. And there is Abraham, the supposed heir of the entire region, living as a nomad.
Living outside the walls.
Exactly. And that brings us to what might be the most striking, almost agonizing irony in the entire Genesis narrative.
Oh, this part is wild.
It is. Despite being promised the length and breadth of the land, do you know what the only substantial piece of Canaan that Abraham actually owned during his entire lifetime was?
A grave.
A grave. The cave of Machpelah.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that, because the narrative in Genesis 23 spends a significant amount of time detailing this transaction.
It goes into deep detail.
Yeah, his wife Sarah dies and Abraham is in mourning. But because he's lived as a pilgrim, sojourner, he owns absolutely nothing.
Not an inch.
He doesn't even have a patch of dirt to bury his own wife. So he has to go to the local authorities, the Hittites, and essentially beg to purchase a burial plot.
And the negotiation process described in the text is deeply revealing. It's a classic ancient Near Eastern public negotiation. Right.
It's full of exaggerated politeness that masks a stark reality. Abraham is at their mercy.
Completely at their mercy.
If on the Hittite offers to, quote, give him the cave. But in that culture, that was a subtle way of forcing Abraham into a subordinate dependent relationship where he would owe Ephron favors.
Ah, so it wasn't really a gift.
No, not at all. So Abraham insists on paying the full price, 400 shekels of silver, weighing it out publicly so that the deed is uncontestable.
So there's a record.
Exactly. He pays an exorbitant amount, likely vastly overpaying, just to secure this one tiny plot of land.
I want to push back on the emotional reality of this for a second.
Please do.
Because we often read these stories with this glow of inevitability, right? Like knowing how it all turns out. But put yourself in Abraham's sandals.
It's rough.
If an all-powerful deity promises me an entire country and everlasting inheritance and tells me to leave my comfortable life in the city to get it, and then years later, decades later, I am still zipping up a flimsy tent flap every single night.
And the only real estate I actually have my name on after a lifetime of following this god is a cemetery plot that I had to overpay for.
Right.
I would be furious. I would feel like I got scammed. I would become deeply, deeply cynical. How does the narrative suggest that Abraham avoided just collapsing into bitterness?
That right there is the central, agonizing tension of his entire life. It is the defining question of what it means to be a pilgrim.
How did he do it?
Well, the answer is found in how later biblical writers, specifically in the book of Hebrews chapter 11, interpret Abraham's psychology.
Okay, what does Hebrews say?
Hebrews argues that Abraham's tent was not a sign of failure. It wasn't a sign that he was too weak to conquer a city or that God had forgotten him. The tent was a deliberate, calculated sign of faith.
Deliberate.
Yes. The text says he lived in tents because he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God.
Wait, break that down for me. What does that actually mean for the narrative? If he's in Canaan, isn't that the promised land? What is the city with foundations?
It means Abraham realized that the physical dirt of Canaan was only a shadow of the ultimate promise.
Ah, just a shadow.
Exactly. He understood a fundamental structural principle of the covenant. Inheritance is received by faithfulness, not seized by manipulation.
Seized by manipulation, like Babel.
Right. Think back to Babel. If Abraham had grown impatient, gathered an army, and tried to conquer the Canaanite cities by force to secure his legacy, he wouldn't be the father of faith. He would just be building another Babel.
He would be doing the exact same thing they did.
He would have been seizing the promise on his own terms,
Right.
trying to force God's hand.
He would have reverted right back to the grasping of the fall.
Exactly. Well, not just that, but he would have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of God's kingdom.
Right.
His life was purposely unstable because his ultimate hope wasn't finally rooted in a patch of Middle Eastern real estate. It was rooted in God's future cosmic city. He avoided cynicism because he came to value the promiser more than he valued the immediate tangible possession of the promise.
Which perfectly introduces one of the most challenging, yet I think profoundly transformative concepts in this entire deep dive.
The delay.
Yes. The reason Abraham didn't succumb to cynicism is tied to the actual structural purpose of the gap between the promise and the payoff.
This is key.
The theological framework here in the sources calls this the pedagogy of delay. The idea that waiting isn't just wasted time, it is an active classroom.
Yes, and to understand this, you have to look at the timeline. Delayed fulfillment is not an accident in the narrative.
Right, it's intentional.
It is a core mechanism of covenant formation. God doesn't just make the promise in Genesis 12 and then vanish. He reiterates the promise to Abraham over and over again.
He keeps reminding him.
Exactly. In Genesis 13, after Abraham separates from his nephew Lot, God tells him to look in every direction, promising the land to his offspring forever.
And then chapter 15.
Right, in Genesis 15, God formalizes the covenant in this dramatic, terrifying night vision, showing him the stars and saying, "So shall your offspring be."
And chapter 17.
In Genesis 17, God confirms the everlasting covenant, changes his name from Abram to Abraham, and introduces the physical sign of circumcision.
But still no land.
Exactly. Yet, despite these intense divine encounters, the actual physical fulfillment of these promises is continually, agonizingly deferred.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that delay, because the assertion is that this delay is pedagogical. It is meant to teach.
Right, it's a classroom.
God isn't just dangling a carrot on a stick or withholding a prize because he's capricious. He is actively forming a human being.
Yes.
The historical context here makes the delay even more excruciating, specifically regarding the promise of a son. Sarah is barren, and in the ancient Near East, barrenness wasn't just a private medical sorrow, it was a social catastrophe.
It was devastating. In that patriarchal culture, a woman's entire social value, her security, and her legacy were tied to her ability to produce an heir.
Right.
To be barren was to be viewed as cursed by the gods, to be a source of pity or mockery. And for Abraham, it meant the end of his line. His entire wealth and legacy would pass to a servant.
So when God promises them a son, and then makes them wait 25 years...
25 years.
Until Abraham is 100 and Sarah is 90... the psychological pressure cooker they are living in is almost unimaginable.
That is terrible.
So why? How does that specific agonizing delay actually forge Abraham's character on a psychological level?
Think about what happens in the waiting period. When the promise is delayed, your true motivations are exposed.
Wow.
God is using the delay to teach endurance, yes. But more importantly, he is purifying desire. He is revealing hidden idols in Abraham's heart.
Unpacking what he really wants.
Exactly. When you have to wait for something that long, you eventually have to ask yourself, do I want this blessing because I want the power and security it brings, or do I trust the God who promised it?
Right. Is it about the gift or the giver?
The delay strips away the utilitarian approach to faith, where God is just a vending machine for our desires. It forces Abraham to a place where he has to rely entirely on the miraculous power of God because practically and biologically the situation is completely dead.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about this in modern terms, like a massive inheritance or a trust fund.
Okay, good analogy.
If a billionaire parent hands a 10-year-old child a check for $10 million, it almost universally ruins them.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't have the psychological infrastructure, the character, or the maturity to handle that kind of power and wealth. It destroys their motivation, it isolates them, and it often leads to catastrophic life choices.
We see it all the time.
Right. So the grueling waiting period, the years of learning the value of work, of facing limitations, of developing character that is the vital education required so that the heir can actually handle the blessing without it destroying them. The friction of the wait is the training.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes complete sense of that haunting line I mentioned earlier from Hebrews 11:13.
Right, about dying in faith.
Yes, it says of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar.
They never got the full thing in their lifetime.
They died, holding a promise not yet fulfilled in full. Why? Because the waiting is the training ground.
The delay is the point.
If God handed the full realized inheritance to a people whose hearts were still prone to battle building, they would just turn the promised land into another idol.
They'd just build another tower.
They would worship the gift and forget the giver, the delay, the barrenness, the tent life. It systematically dismantles their idolatry.
And we see that training tested to its absolute limit in Genesis 22.
The binding of Isaac.
Yes, this is the famous and deeply troubling story of the binding of Isaac. After 25 years of waiting, Abraham finally gets the promised son. Isaac is born.
The promise is fulfilled.
He is the walking, breathing fulfillment of the promise. And then God asks Abraham to sacrifice him.
It is the ultimate psychological and spiritual crisis. God essentially says, take the promise I gave you, the thing you waited a quarter of a century for, the only means by which your legacy can continue, and give it back to me.
That's horrifying.
It's a moment where Abraham's faith has to look entirely past the gift, and even past the mechanics of how the promise will be fulfilled, and trust solely in the character of God.
And he does it.
The narrative shows that Abraham was willing to obey because he reasoned that God was able even to raise Isaac from the dead. He had finally reached the point where his ultimate love and trust were in God himself, not just in the blessings God provided.
So, to survive this lifelong training ground, to live in that massive gap between the promise and the payoff without losing your mind or becoming completely cynical, the pilgrim has to adopt a very specific daily posture.
Right, a daily practice.
You can't just grit your teeth for 100 years. And the historical texts point out that we see this posture in Abraham's most frequent activity, which is the building of altars.
The correlation is impossible to miss. The text states very clearly that pilgrimage and worship belong together. They are inseparable.
They go hand in hand.
As Abraham moves through the land, he builds altars. He builds one at Shechem, at Bethel, at Hebron. Wherever he pitches his tent, an altar goes up next to it.
Leaving a mark.
Yes. This shows that his movement isn't just rootless, aimless wandering. He isn't a vagabond. He is engaged in directed devotion.
I love the contrast drawn here between the act of building an altar and the act of building an empire, like at Babel.
Oh, it's a brilliant contrast.
What does it actually take to build an altar? You are taking unhewn stones, natural elements of the earth, and you are stacking them up not to create a fortress to hide behind and not to build a tower to climb up to heaven, but to create a space for sacrifice.
Just a pile of rocks, essentially.
Exactly. It's leaving a mark of gratitude and submission. Abraham inhabits the land as a worshiper long before he ever possesses it as an heir. The theological rule here in the sources is worship comes before ownership.
And that ties directly into one of the most famous verses in the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 15:6. God promises him descendants as numerous as the stars, and the text says, and he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness.
Righteousness by faith.
This is a monumental shift in ancient religious thought. Abraham wasn't counted righteous or in right standing with the divine because he successfully built a city or conquered an army or amassed a massive fortune.
Like the kings of his day.
Exactly. He was counted righteous by faith, by trusting, by resting in the promise rather than striving to secure his own destiny.
But let me interrupt and ask you a very practical question about this, because this brings up a massive friction point for how we live today.
Sure.
So what does this all mean for the concept of ambition? We are constantly told by self-help books, by corporate culture, by society at large, that we need to build our brand, build our legacy.
Build your empire.
Right. Build your empire. Make a dent in the universe.
Yeah.
But we look at Abraham, the supposed father of faith, and he just wanders around living in a tent and leaving piles of rocks.
Yeah.
Does this theological framework suggest that human ambition is inherently bad? That we should just be passive, check out of society, and wait for heaven?
Not at all. It is incredibly important to parse this correctly. The narrative is not anti-ambition. It is anti-idolatry.
The anti-idolatry.
It is fundamentally about the order of operations in the human heart. Remember the core principle we discussed with Eden? We do not seize the kingdom, we receive it.
We receive it.
We do not manufacture our own final security. Therefore, the believer's life is fundamentally receptive before it is active.
Receptive before active. Break that down for me.
Well, the ambition of Babel is to build a tower, to make a name for yourself, to secure your own legacy through your own power.
It's about me.
Right. The ambition of Abraham is to follow God into the unknown so that God can make his name great in order to bless others. The locus of trust is entirely different.
Ah, I see.
You can be incredibly active in this world. You can build businesses, create breathtaking art, lead organizations, and cure diseases. But you do it with open hands.
With open hands.
You do it recognizing that your ultimate inheritance, your core identity, and your final security are gifts you receive from God, not prizes you conquer through your own relentless striving.
That posture of receiving rather than seizing is so radically countercultural. It feels like taking a deep breath after holding it for a decade.
It really does.
And what's amazing is that this isn't just a quirky personality trait of Abraham. As you trace the historical and narrative arc of the Bible, you realize that this exact posture, this pilgrim dynamic, actually sets the genetic code for the entire rest of the story. It expands the map completely.
When you look at the macro structure of the biblical narrative, you can trace this pilgrim pattern corporately through the entire history of the nation of Israel.
It's everywhere.
It certainly doesn't stop with Abraham's death. Look at the Exodus event. The entire nation of Israel leaves slavery in Egypt, and they are moving toward the Promised Land. But what happens in between?
The wilderness.
The wilderness.
More delay, more tents, more wandering.
Precisely the same pattern, but on a national scale. And in that wilderness, they are subjected to the exact same pedagogy of delay. They have to learn dependence through the daily provision of manna.
Let's talk about the mechanics of the manna because it perfectly illustrates the anti-Babel concept.
It really does.
God provides bread from heaven every morning, but the rule is you can only gather enough for one day.
Just one day.
If you try to hoard it, if you try to stockpile it to create your own security system for the future, it breeds worms and rots.
It forces daily dependence. God is actively teaching an entire nation of former slaves to live from his continuous provision, rather than reverting to the self-sufficiency and hoarding mentality of the empire they just left.
Because Egypt was all about hoarding.
Exactly. And the narrative continues this pattern. Fast forward to the period of the kingdom under David and Solomon. Israel finally gets the land, they get a king, they even get a permanent temple instead of a mobile tabernacle.
Right, the temple replaces the tent.
It feels like they have finally arrived. But the text frames even this peak era as partial and anticipatory.
It doesn't last.
Because eventually the kings become corrupt, the people revert to idolatry, the kingdom fractures, and it all leads to the Babylonian exile.
And the exile is the definitive proof that the physical real estate of Canaan was never the ultimate goal.
Ever.
They lost the land because of covenant unfaithfulness, meaning they stopped acting like stewards and started acting like tyrannical owners who abused the poor and worshipped false gods.
They built Babel in Canaan.
Yeah, exactly. But losing the land clarified a brutal reality. Geography alone couldn't fix the human heart. You can put broken people on a promised land and they will just turn it into another Babel.
Right.
Which is why the later prophets start looking forward to something much bigger. They start prophesying about a spiritual renewal, a new heart, the Spirit being poured out, a new heavens and a new earth.
Which brings us to the ultimate turning point of the narrative. The Christological fulfillment.
Christological fulfillment. Let's define that.
Now, to translate that term, it means how the person and work of Jesus Christ completes and answers the trajectory set by the Old Testament.
Okay.
The New Testament writers look at this foundational pattern of pilgrimage, delay, and inheritance, and they expand it to a cosmic scale. Jesus is presented as the true seed of Abraham, the faithful son who actually obeys the covenant, and the ultimate pilgrim.
The ultimate pilgrim.
Remember, Jesus is the one who explicitly said of himself that foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head.
He lived the ultimate tent life.
Yes, he did.
But here is where my mind gets blown by the source material. The promise gets massively expanded. It is like looking at a seed and then looking at the massive oak tree it becomes.
He's exponential.
The promise to Abraham started as a specific zip code in the ancient Near East, a localized strip of land in Canaan. But in the New Testament, the language completely shifts. It moves from inheriting a strip of land to inheriting the entire cosmos. But hold on, if the inheritance is now for those who are in Christ, as Paul writes in Galatians 3, doesn't that fundamentally alter who gets to be a part of this story?
It completely revolutionizes it. Paul explicitly addresses this in Romans 4:13, where he says that the promise to Abraham and his offspring was that he would be heir of the world.
Heir of the world, not just the Middle East.
Not just Canaan, the world. the cosmos. The gospel of Jesus doesn't shrink the original promise. It shatters the outer shell of the seed so the tree can cover the earth.
That's a great image.
And because the inheritance is now cosmic, the requirements for entry change. The inheritance is no longer earned by ethnic descent, or by ritual status like circumcision, or by moral superiority.
How is it earned then?
It is received purely through faith, through union with the Messiah. If you belong to Christ by faith, Paul argues, then you are Abraham's offspring, and you are heirs according to the original promise.
And this massive cosmic expansion reveals the true beating heart of God's original promise to Abraham back in Genesis 12, which honestly completely blows up a huge misconception people have about the Bible.
What misconception?
Well, a lot of people read the Old Testament and think the promise was meant to be this exclusive VIP club for one specific ethnic group, and God didn't care about anyone else.
Oh, right. The tribal deity idea.
Yes. But this brings us to the core mechanic of the covenant of blessing from the sources.
This is a crucial pivot in understanding the entire biblical storyline. We have to look intensely at the exact phrasing in Genesis 12:3.
What does it say?
God tells Abraham, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed."
All the families, not just his family, the whole map.
Yes, the theological principle at work here is that election is for mission, not privilege.
Election is for mission, not privilege.
And to break that down, God did not elect or choose Abraham so that Abraham could hoard the divine blessing, sit on a pile of wealth, and look down his nose at the rest of humanity.
He wasn't supposed to build a fortress.
Abraham was not God's pampered favorite. He was the first domino. He was blessed specifically and intentionally so that he could be a channel, a conduit of blessing to the surrounding nations.
It completely shatters the idea of a closed-off tribal deity who only cares about one nation's borders. The goal was global from day one.
From the very beginning.
In Genesis 12, right after Babel, God's answer to humanity's rebellion wasn't to abandon the nations. It was to start a rescue mission through one family that would eventually reach all of them. It wasn't about building a walled garden for a select few. It was about opening the gates to everyone.
And you see this trajectory reach its spectacular conclusion at the very end of the biblical narrative in the book of Revelation.
The vision of the end.
Right. In that final apocalyptic vision of the renewed creation, the nations are not erased or assimilated into one homogeneous blob. John the Revelator sees a multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne.
Every nation.
The diversity of the human race is maintained, but it is brought into profound unity under the worship of God. The goal was never to make everyone culturally identical, but to reconcile all peoples to their Creator and, consequently, to each other.
This raises an incredibly convicting question for us today. If the church is meant to be this multinational people sent into the world mirroring this Abrahamic calling, how do we view our own gifts?
It's a tough question.
If you are listening to this right now, how do you view your own privileges, your resources, your education, your wealth? The principle of election for mission means that any blessing you have received in this life, whether it is financial prosperity, relational stability, intellectual capacity, or spiritual insight, is not actually yours to keep.
It's not just for you.
It is meant for someone else's benefit, too. You are blessed to be a blessing. If you stop the flow, if you dam up the river and just hoard your resources for your own comfort, you are violating the very nature of the covenant. You are building Babel all over again.
It reorients the entire purpose of your life. It is not just about what you can accumulate. It is about what flows through you to heal and elevate the world around you.
So with this cosmic, global, eternity-spanning perspective in place, we have to bring this all the way down to the ground.
Let's do it.
Let's make this intensely practical. What does this actually look like for you, the listener, when you wake up tomorrow morning, drink your coffee, and commute to work? How do you actually pack for the pilgrim life?
The implications are intensely practical, because if you truly internalize the belief that you are an heir to a future cosmic inheritance, it radically alters how you interact with the present world.
It has to.
Let's start with the most obvious friction point, the stewardship of our material lives. The directive for the pilgrim is simple, but incredibly difficult. Hold things with open hands.
Open hands.
You can possess things, but you cannot worship them. You can enjoy the beauty of the world, but you cannot clutch it as your ultimate savior.
I used to think about this like staying in a hotel where you don't steal the TV because you know you're checking out.
Right. That's a common analogy.
But honestly, given the weight of what we've discussed, I think a much better analogy is living as an ambassador.
Oh, I like that.
If you are an ambassador deployed to a foreign country, you don't just sit in a barren room waiting to go home. You engage. You buy a house, you plant a garden, you learn the language, you invest deeply in the culture, and you love the people around you.
You're fully there.
But crucially, your citizenship, your ultimate allegiance, and your final home are elsewhere. You don't derive your core identity from the country where you were stationed, and you don't try to make it your eternal kingdom. You are there on a mission.
The ambassador analogy is spot on. You invest heavily, but you remain untethered. You use the world without being owned by it.
Exactly.
And this applies with equal force to how we approach ministry, career, and leadership. There is a stern warning embedded in this theology for anyone in a position of influence.
Yeah.
Your leadership is a pilgrimage, not an empire-building project.
It's so easy to forget that.
Leaders are called to be fellow pilgrims, walking alongside people and pointing them toward the future city. They are not the owners of the road. When leaders start trying to manufacture permanent monuments to their own glory, whether that's a massive corporate legacy, a megachurch, or a cult of personality, they have forgotten they're supposed to be living in tents. They have started building ziggurats.
And what about when the reality of life is agonizing? What about suffering?
That's the hardest part.
Because we talked about Abraham waiting 25 years for a son. The pilgrim life doesn't insulate you from pain. In many ways, it guarantees a certain kind of friction.
It absolutely does.
But the framework we are looking at gives suffering a completely different orientation. It gives it a future. The central promise here is that delay is not denial. Barrenness is not the final word. Exile is not abandonment.
That is so important.
When you are anchored to the certainty that the end of the story is secure, that the city with foundations is actually coming something, the present friction, no matter how painful, doesn't have the power to destroy you.
Which culminates in how the pilgrim faces the ultimate, unavoidable friction of the human experience, which is death itself.
The ultimate friction.
The historical application here is deeply moving. Because Abraham lived his entire life with his eyes fixed on a future city, he could face his own mortality differently than the kings of Babel.
How so?
He didn't face death as a defeated man, losing the only empire he had ever known, his fingers desperately clutching at his wealth as he was dragged into the dark.
Right.
Because he lived with open hands, he could face death as someone simply stepping over a threshold. He was stepping into the fuller possession of the city God had prepared for him. In the pilgrim framework, death isn't the catastrophic end of the inheritance. It is the grand entrance into it.
That shifts the entire paradigm of how we view the arc of our lives. It completely defangs the terror of mortality. And it brings us to the ultimate synthesis of what it means to live as what we might call an heir in transit.
Abraham left his civilization without a map, but he did not leave without a promise.
He had the promise.
He chose the vulnerability of tents over the security of permanent monuments because his ultimate trust was anchored in the character of the promiser. And that is the exact same invitation extended to everyone listening. We are called to live by faith in a future inheritance, stubbornly refusing to make this present, broken, shifting world our final resting place.
We are heirs in transit. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to really chew on this week.
Okay.
I want you to think about your biggest current frustration. Think about that thing you are endlessly waiting for, the situation that makes you feel trapped in that waiting room we talked about at the very beginning of the show.
We all have one.
The career shift, the healing, the relationship, the financial breakthrough. What if that delay is not a sign that God is ignoring you? What if the delay is the exact mechanism being used to actively shape you?
That's a profound thought.
If you truly are an heir in transit, what if the excruciating friction of your current waiting period is the vital, necessary tool being used to forge your character? What if this waiting room is the only way to give you the capacity to actually handle the massive eternal inheritance that is coming without it destroying you?
It changes everything. It transforms the waiting room from a place of despair and anxiety into a place of profound, purposeful preparation.
It really does. So the next time you feel like you are just zipping up a flimsy tent flap while everyone else around you seems to be building secure, impenetrable castles, remember that blueprint. You are built for a city with foundations. Keep walking.